Have you ever been hurt by someone, truly hurt, only to watch them act like nothing ever happened? Maybe it was a betrayal, a lie. A moment when they chose silence instead of honesty. And then, a few days later, a text pops up on your phone. "Hey, how are you?" As if the wound they left behind was just erased. No apology, no acknowledgement, no attempt to repair. And for a second, you question yourself. Did it even matter to them? Did they even notice the pain they caused? Let's get one thing straight. This isn't forgetfulness. It's avoidance. It's the quiet art of dodging responsibility while pretending everything is okay. Why do people do this? Because owning up to their actions would shatter the image they have of themselves. Because facing your pain would mean confronting their shadow. And that, more than anything, terrifies them. So instead of saying, "I'm sorry I hurt you," they smile, change the subject, or pretend it never happened. But that doesn't mean you imagined it. It doesn't mean your pain was invalid. And it certainly doesn't mean you're overreacting. It means they've chosen comfort over courage. You see, accountability feels threatening to people who live on a fragile foundation of ego. To admit fault, they'd have to risk looking in the mirror and not liking what they see. And that takes strength they may not have built. Now here's where Stoic wisdom steps in. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you respond to it that matters." Think about that for a moment. You don't get to control whether someone apologizes. You don't get to rewrite their choices or force them to acknowledge your pain. But you do get to choose your response. You can let their silence become your prison, or you can turn it into your power. Because here's the truth, no one tells you. You don't need their apology to heal. You don't need their guilt to grow, and you certainly don't need their permission to move on. What you need is clarity. Clarity that their behavior is a reflection of them, not a measurement of your worth. The Stoics teach us to separate what we control from what we don't. You cannot control another person's character, but you can protect your peace. You can stand firm in your own integrity, and you can walk away from cycles that only repeat pain. So if someone hurt you, then pretended nothing happened, here's what I want you to remember. Their silence speaks volumes, but it doesn't define your story. Their avoidance is not closure. It's just an escape hatch for their conscience. And you deserve more than half-hearted conversations and emotional amnesia. You deserve people who meet you with honesty, not convenience, with accountability, not excuses. Now, does that mean you have to confront every person who wronged you? Not necessarily. Sometimes the most powerful confrontation is internal. You sit with your pain, you acknowledge it, you learn from it. And then you decide, I don't need their apology to build the life I want. Because the best revenge is never payback. The best revenge is rebuilding your inner world so solidly that their absence doesn't shake it. The best revenge is being able to say, I see what you did, I see who you are, and I choose to rise anyway. This is what Stoicism is all about. Not suppressing emotion, but mastering it. Not letting someone else's immaturity hijack your inner state. It's about choosing dignity when others choose denial. Grace when others choose guiltlessness. So if you're watching this and silently carrying the weight of someone else's wrongdoing, let this be your reminder. You don't need them to circle back. You don't need closure from chaos. You just need one thing, to respond with wisdom, not wounds. Because how you respond becomes your power. It becomes your story. And ultimately, it becomes your peace. So take a deep breath. Reclaim your power. And remember, the person who hurt you may not be ready to face themselves, but you are. You're ready to face truth. You're ready to build strength. You're ready to walk forward without waiting for an apology that may never come. And that's how you begin to rise. Part 1. They remember, they just don't want to face it. Let's get something clear right now. They didn't forget. They remember exactly what they did, the words they used, the silence they weaponized. The moment they crossed a line they knew they shouldn't, but instead of facing it, they tuck it away. Not because they don't care, but because admitting the truth would mean confronting who they really are. And for some people, that's just too heavy a mirror to look into. You see, this is what selective memory really is. It's not forgetfulness. It's a form of emotional self-defense. They choose to erase the parts of the story where they were the villain. They edit the past so they can continue living with themselves, without guilt, without responsibility. It's easier to pretend nothing happened, to send a casual text, crack a joke, or keep the conversation light, than it is to say, I know I hurt you, and I own it. But why is that so hard? Because accountability threatens the illusion of who they think they are. To own their impact would require emotional maturity, courage, and humility. And if those qualities haven't been cultivated, what you get instead is performance. They may smile, they may reach out, but underneath that surface is a carefully crafted script, one that avoids shame, one that dodges discomfort, one that lets them keep being the good person in their mind, even if they weren't in your story. This is the hidden truth. They remember. They just don't want to face it. And here's the real danger of that dynamic. It can make you feel crazy. You begin to wonder, maybe it wasn't that big of a deal. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe I should just move on and stop bringing it up. But that's exactly what their avoidance depends on, your silence. Because if you stop talking about it, they get to stop thinking about it. They get to walk away unchallenged, untarnished. But here's what the Stoics would ask you. Is that within your control? Epictetus reminds us, some things are up to us and some things are not. And one of the things that is not up to us is someone else's conscience. You cannot force someone to be emotionally honest. You cannot make someone apologize from a place of growth if they're still operating from a place of ego. So don't exhaust yourself trying to wake someone up who's determined to stay asleep. Instead, turn the mirror back toward yourself, not to judge, but to free yourself. Because when you realize that their forgetfulness is a performance, you stop looking for closure in a play where the other actor refuses to break character, and you start asking better questions. Why do I feel the need for their acknowledgement to move forward? What does their silence teach me about their capacity for truth? And most importantly, how do I want to respond now that I see what this really is? Because here's the deeper truth. Healing doesn't come from forcing someone to admit the past. Healing comes from no longer needing them to. When someone pretends nothing happened, it's not just disrespectful, it's revealing. It reveals the emotional ceiling they're living under. It reveals how far they're willing or not willing to go for integrity. And it reveals just how important it is for you to stop negotiating your peace with people who fear honesty. The Stoics teach that our strength lies in how we interpret the world, not in how others behave. So when someone minimizes your pain, don't shrink. Expand. See it clearly. Their memory is not broken. It's selective. Their actions aren't careless. They're calculated. Their performance isn't forgetfulness. It's protection of ego. And once you see that, you can stop begging for validation. You can stop waiting for them to grow. You can stop handing your power to someone who's afraid to hold their own truth. Because your peace is no longer up for trade. It's yours. It's earned. And it's guarded, not by revenge, but by wisdom. The next time someone acts like nothing happened, remember this. They're not confused. They're avoiding. And their refusal to face what they did has nothing to do with your worth. It only confirms your wisdom in seeing the truth and rising anyway. Part 2. Why they can't face the truth. Let's talk about truth. Not the kind you find in textbooks or courtroom dramas. I'm talking about the truth that makes your chest tighten. The kind that forces you to sit with guilt, to own your flaws, to say, yes, I caused pain. That kind of truth? Most people run from it. You see, when someone hurts you and refuses to acknowledge it, it's not always because they're evil or heartless. More often, it's because facing the truth would destroy the identity they've worked so hard to build. They want to believe they're a good person, a kind person, a decent human being who would never do something like that. So when their actions betray that image, when they lash out, betray, lie, manipulate, they're left with a terrifying dilemma. Face the truth, or protect the lie. And more often than not, they choose the lie. Not necessarily because they enjoy deceiving others, but because they can't bear to feel the weight of their own guilt. Admitting what they did would shatter the illusion they live inside. So instead of growing, they defend. Instead of taking responsibility, they redirect. Have you ever confronted someone about how they hurt you, only to hear, "You're too sensitive. Don't take it so personally," or even, "That's not what really happened. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a defense mechanism." They're not arguing with the facts. They're protecting the story they've told themselves. The story where they're the victim. The misunderstood one. The one who meant well, even when their actions said otherwise. They twist your pain into an overreaction. Not because they don't know it hurt you, but because acknowledging your pain would mean admitting their own capacity to cause harm. And here's the Stoic insight in all of this. We are not disturbed by things, but by the views we take of things. Epictetus. From their view, admitting wrongdoing equals being a bad person. So they do everything in their power to avoid that label, even if it means gaslighting others. But here's the root problem. Most people were never taught how to sit with guilt. We live in a culture that encourages blame shifting. We're taught to point fingers, to justify, to run. Rarely are we taught to pause and ask, where might I have been wrong? Guilt is uncomfortable. It burns. But here's what the Stoics knew. Discomfort is not the enemy. Discomfort is the beginning of transformation. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth." But how many people do you know who are actually happy to be proven wrong? Most of us weren't raised that way. So when someone hurts you, then pretends it never happened, and worse, makes you feel like you're overreacting. They're not just avoiding you. They're avoiding the truth that lives within them. They're avoiding the fact that they messed up, that they weren't as kind, as thoughtful, or as good as they believed. And that realization, it terrifies them. So what do? They rewrite the script. They minimize. They joke. They change the subject. They label you emotional, too much, dramatic, because it's easier than saying the words, "I hurt you, and I was wrong." Now here's the part that matters for you. It's not your job to force someone to grow. You can hold space for truth, yes. But you can't force someone to sit in it if they're determined to flee. And if you keep waiting for someone who's terrified of guilt to finally offer you closure, you'll wait a long, long time. So what do? We take back our power. We stop needing their apology to validate our experience. We stop internalizing their deflection as proof that we were too much. And instead, we learn to stand firm in our own clarity. Because clarity is freedom. When you know someone is protecting a false version of themselves, you stop arguing with the mask. You stop negotiating with denial. And you start focusing on the only thing you can control, your response. That's Stoicism in action. We don't chase apologies. We don't beg for accountability. We don't stay small to protect someone else's comfort. Instead, we rise. We rise by telling ourselves the truth, even when they won't. We rise by sitting with our guilt when it's our turn, because we've developed the strength they never did. And we rise by becoming the kind of person who doesn't need to lie to protect our identity. So if you're watching this and thinking, they hurt me and now they're pretending it never happened, just know this. It's not because they forgot. It's not because you imagined it. And it's certainly not because your pain wasn't real. It's because they can't face the truth, because the truth threatens the version of themselves they're desperately trying to protect. But you were never meant to live inside someone else's illusion. You were meant to rise above it. Part 3. You didn't overreact. You responded. Let's clear something up once and for all. You didn't overreact. You responded. That's an important distinction, and one that people will try to erase when it's convenient for them. You set a boundary. You spoke up. You expressed the pain that someone else caused. And suddenly, you're too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But here's the trick no one tells you. This is not a misunderstanding. It's a strategy, a manipulative pattern that plays out like this. They hurt you. You react. They flip the script. Now suddenly, the issue isn't what they did. It's how you handled it. They shift the spotlight onto your tone, your timing, your intensity, anything but their own behavior. And before you know it, you're questioning yourself. Did I go too far? Maybe I should have stayed quiet. Maybe I am the problem. That confusion? That's not accidental. That's gaslighting. It's emotional manipulation designed to make you distrust your own reality. And let me tell you, this is where so many people begin to shrink. They start second-guessing their instincts. They stop setting boundaries. They silence themselves to keep the peace. But here's the Stoic truth. If someone does wrong, the harm is to themselves. The rest is only your interpretation. Marcus Aurelius. You see, the moment you internalize their guilt as your shame, they win. Not because they were right, but because they convinced you to carry a weight that was never yours to hold. Now ask yourself this: why is having boundaries suddenly considered dramatic? Why is being honest about pain labeled overreacting? Because it's easier for them to call you emotional than to admit they were irresponsible. It's easier to frame you as irrational than to face the damage they caused. And this isn't just about one conversation or one person. This is about a culture that rewards stillness in the face of mistreatment, especially if you're the one who's been wronged. But here's where Stoicism offers us a path forward. The Stoics didn't say, "Don't feel." They said, "Don't be ruled by your feelings." There's a difference between a reaction and a response. A reaction is explosive. It gives your power away. A response is measured. It protects your energy. They want you to react, because a reaction can be dismissed. It becomes the headline. Look how upset they got. But when you respond, with clarity, with calm, with conviction, they have nowhere to run. Stillness terrifies people who rely on chaos to maintain control. So instead of yelling, you set a boundary. Instead of begging, you withdraw your energy. Instead of trying to explain your worth, you live it. That's where your power is. You don't need to over-explain yourself. You don't need to defend your right to feel hurt. And you certainly don't need to apologize for expecting respect. Let me tell you something very clearly. Having boundaries is not emotional immaturity. It's self-respect. And refusing to stay silent about mistreatment is not overreacting. It's courage. So if someone flips the script on you, makes you feel like you're the problem for having a reaction to their disrespect, pause and remember this. That's not truth. That's manipulation. And here's what you can do instead. Breathe before you speak. Clarify what's actually happening. Reaffirm your boundary, not with aggression, but with grounded certainty. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to match their chaos with more chaos, because your stillness, that's your sword, that's your shield, and that's exactly what Stoic wisdom trains us for. Not to be numb, but to be unshakable. To choose a higher path, even when someone else chooses the low one. So the next time someone calls you too emotional for calling out hurtful behavior, ask yourself, who benefits from me staying silent? Because the truth is, you didn't overreact. You simply refuse to abandon yourself. And that's not weakness. That's strength. That's clarity. That's growth. And it's the very thing they weren't expecting you to have. Part 4. Silence as strategy, not weakness. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you chose silence and it scared someone? Not because you were hiding, not because you had nothing to say, but because your silence made them realize they could no longer control you. That's when silence becomes more than absence. It becomes a strategy. We live in a world that praises loudness. Speak up, fight back, be seen, be heard. But sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is to say nothing at all, especially when someone expects you to explode. Especially when they're counting on your emotional reaction to keep the game going. You see, manipulators thrive on emotional fuel. They provoke. They twist. They bait. And then they feed off your response to justify their behavior or regain control. But when you stop reacting, when you choose stillness over chaos, they don't know what to do. They lose their script. They lose their grip. They lose their power. And that's the moment you begin to reclaim yours. This isn't silence rooted in fear or passivity. It's not about avoiding confrontation. It's about mastering yourself so deeply that you no longer hand over your peace to people who haven't earned it. Seneca once wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." And I would add, sometimes to stay silent is too. Because silence in the face of manipulation isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's a refusal to participate in a performance. It's a quiet declaration. I see what you're doing, and I'm not playing anymore. Let's be clear. This kind of silence doesn't come from apathy. It comes from clarity. When you've seen the pattern, the push-pull, the twisted logic that always ends with you questioning yourself, you learn that silence is not the absence of power. It is power. It's the power to stop feeding fires that were never yours to fight. The power to let someone wrestle with their own chaos without dragging you into it. The power to become unreadable, and therefore untouchable. And that's when things shift, because people who rely on emotional manipulation need data. They need to read your face, your tone, your reaction, your weakness. When you give them nothing, they panic, they fumble, they second guess. They project harder, but now they're only talking to their own echo. It drives them mad, because silence, used wisely, is disarming. It's not the cold shoulder, it's not passive aggression, it's self-control with a backbone. It's the moment you decide, I don't owe you my energy. I owe it to myself. This is the kind of strength that Stoicism prepares you for. Not the strength to dominate, but the strength to withhold. To not react just because you were provoked. To protect your mind like a sacred temple, no longer open to emotional invaders. In Meditations, Marcus Aurelius reminds us, you always own the option of having no opinion. There is never a need to get worked up or to trouble your soul. That's the kind of internal freedom we're after. When someone tries to guilt trip you, shame you, insult you, or twist your words, you respond not with more words, but with dignified distance. That's silence. It's not avoidance, it's choice. And yes, it may confuse them. It may frustrate them. It may even cause them to escalate for a moment. But that's when the strategy proves itself. Because when the storm passes and you've stayed grounded, you'll see who they really are, beyond the performance. And more importantly, you'll see who you are. Someone who no longer needs to win the argument. Someone who no longer needs to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. Someone who doesn't need to raise their voice to hold their ground. You become still, but not stuck, quiet, but not silenced. Unmoved, but more powerful than ever. So, if you're in a situation right now where someone is baiting you, where you feel the pressure to defend, to explain, to justify, ask yourself, what would happen if I simply didn't react? What if I stayed still, not to lose, but to lead? Because silence isn't the end of your power, it's the evolution of it. The next time someone tries to provoke you, don't just ask, what should I say? Ask, what does silence protect me from? Because sometimes the most powerful words are the ones you never speak. And in a world addicted to noise, your silence might just be the loudest message they'll ever hear. Part 5. Ask, don't attack. The power of strategic questions. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to someone is not an accusation, not a confrontation, not a lecture, but a question. Let me explain. When someone hurts you, your instinct might be to strike back, to confront them with fire, to demand answers. That's normal. You're human. But if you've ever tried to hold someone accountable and been met with defensiveness, blame shifting, or outright denial, you know how that usually ends. They shut down, they deflect, they flip the script so fast that suddenly you're the one on trial. It's exhausting, isn't it? That's why I want to offer you something different, something powerful, something subtle, a question. Because questions have a way of slipping past someone's defenses, right into the heart of their conscience. They don't accuse. They invite reflection. They don't escalate. They expose. And most importantly, questions allow you to stay in control, without ever raising your voice. Let me give you an example. Let's say someone hurt you deeply and refuses to acknowledge it. Instead of saying, you don't even care about what you did, try this. What do you think it says about someone when they cause pain and don't acknowledge it? See the difference? You're not shouting. You're not blaming. You're just asking. And that's what makes it disarming. Now here's the trick. You don't ask to win. You ask to observe, because how they respond, or how they don't, tells you everything. Do they deflect? Do they get angry? Do they pause, and for a moment look inward? That silence between your question and their answer. That's where the truth lives. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus, the great Stoic teacher, said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." A strategic question doesn't need to be followed by an argument. It doesn't need to be repeated. It doesn't even need a perfect answer. It simply reveals. It reveals the gap between someone's character and their image. It reveals how far they're willing to go to protect their ego. and it reveals whether they are capable not just of hearing you, but of seeing you. The truth is, most people aren't used to being asked uncomfortable questions. They're used to confrontation. They're used to blame. But a question? A calm, thoughtful question? That's a mirror they didn't expect to face. Here are a few more to consider when someone tries to dodge accountability. Do you believe pain just disappears when it's ignored? Why do you think it's easier to call someone sensitive than to consider their perspective? What do you think healing looks like when responsibility is avoided? You're not demanding anything. You're not forcing growth. You're offering clarity. And here's the part that aligns beautifully with Stoic thinking. The goal isn't to change them. The goal is to stay rooted in your own values, your integrity, your self-mastery, your peace. Marcus Aurelius said it best. If anyone can refute me, show me I'm making a mistake, or looking at things from the wrong perspective, I'll gladly change. It's the truth I'm after. The Stoic path is not about proving others wrong. It's about seeing things as they are, not as we wish them to be. And strategic questioning does just that. It cuts through the noise. It bypasses ego. It puts the burden of truth where it belongs, on their response. But be prepared. Some people will avoid the question. Some will turn it back on you. Some will walk away entirely. Let them, because even that is an answer. When someone can't even sit with a single question about their behavior, that tells you everything you need to know about their capacity for growth and their readiness for a real relationship of any kind. So, if you're standing at that edge, unsure of what to say next, here's your power move. Don't attack. Ask. Not to control the outcome, not to win the argument, but to see clearly. Because once you see clearly, you no longer chase closure. You no longer beg for explanations. You simply understand. And in that understanding you rise. The right question, asked with clarity and calm, can say more than 100 accusations ever could. And if you listen closely to the answer, or the silence, you'll hear the truth loud and clear. Part 6. Set boundaries with dignity. Let's talk about boundaries, not walls, not ultimatums, not emotional threats, but clear decisions made with calm, quiet strength. Because somewhere along the way, we were taught that if you set boundaries, you're being too harsh, too cold, or too unforgiving. But I want to flip that on its head. A boundary isn't a rejection of another person. It's a protection of yourself. Let me say that again. Setting a boundary isn't about pushing people away. It's about keeping yourself whole. And here's something many people misunderstand. Calm is not consent. Just because you didn't scream, just because you didn't make a scene, just because you took time to think, to observe, to detach, doesn't mean you've agreed to be treated that way again. You're allowed to walk away without explaining yourself 5 different ways. You're allowed to say no without apologizing for it. You're allowed to decide, with dignity, that you're no longer available for the kind of treatment that drains your peace. You don't need their agreement. You don't need their approval. And you don't need the perfect words to justify your limits. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is simply, I'm not available for that anymore. Not in anger, not in resentment, but in clarity. Because clarity is what boundaries are made of, not emotion. You see, when we set boundaries in rage, they often sound like threats. But when we set them in awareness, they become a compass for how we move through life. Boundaries don't say, you're a bad person. They say, this is the version of me I'm choosing to protect. They don't punish, they define. And this is where the wisdom of Stoicism becomes a powerful ally. The Stoics taught us that external events are not within our control, but how we respond, that is entirely ours. And setting boundaries, that's a response rooted in self-respect, not self-defense. Marcus Aurelius put it beautifully when he said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." What kind of life are you painting with your choices? If you constantly tolerate behavior that chips away at your dignity, if you keep silent in the face of subtle disrespect, if you allow your boundaries to be negotiated down to comfort someone else's ego, what color is your soul becoming? You were not meant to live life in fragments. Your peace, your energy, your time, these are finite, sacred things. And every time you say yes to someone who treats them carelessly, you're saying no to your own well-being. So how do we set boundaries with dignity? It starts with detachment, not from people, but from outcomes. You don't need them to understand. You don't need them to agree. You just need to be steady in your stance. When someone crosses a line, you don't need to argue. You don't need to prove you're right. You can simply say, "This no longer works for me. I'm not available for this type of exchange. That's not a dynamic I'm willing to entertain." And then, most importantly, you follow through. Because a boundary without follow-through is just a suggestion. But a boundary rooted in your values, that becomes a law you live by. Yes, some people will get upset. Yes, some will call you difficult or cold. But here's the Stoic perspective. Let them. You are not responsible for their comfort. You are responsible for your integrity. And your integrity shines brightest when your words and your actions align. So if someone accuses you of being too calm, too withdrawn, too self-contained, let that be a compliment. Because what they're really saying is, "You're not letting me manipulate you anymore." And they're right. You've grown, you've evolved, and you've realized that you can protect your peace without raising your voice. That's not coldness. That's mastery. The next time you feel guilty for setting a boundary, remember this. You're not shutting someone out. You're simply honoring what your soul can no longer afford to sacrifice. Say it with strength. Say it with softness. Say it with clarity. "I'm not available for that anymore." And walk forward, without guilt, without fear, and without looking back. Part 7. Detach without guilt. Let's talk about one of the hardest things to do in life. Letting go without feeling guilty. You've been conditioned to believe that walking away means failure. That detachment means you didn't care. That choosing yourself makes you selfish. But here's the truth. Guilt is often just conditioning, not truth. You were taught to equate love with sacrifice. To put others first, to give until you're empty, to tolerate pain for the sake of keeping the peace. And when you finally reach your breaking point, when you choose your own peace over their chaos, that guilt creeps in. You wonder, am I giving up too soon? Am I abandoning someone I should be saving? Am I being too cold? But let me ask you this. Why is choosing yourself labeled as betrayal, while self-abandonment is praised as noble? The truth is, detachment is not cruelty. It's clarity. It's the quiet realization that you cannot continue carrying the emotional weight of a relationship, whether romantic, platonic, or family, that's built on imbalance. And that doesn't mean you hate them. It doesn't mean you're bitter. It doesn't mean you want revenge. It just means you're done sacrificing yourself to make someone else comfortable. You see, most people confuse detachment with resentment, but they are not the same. Detachment isn't coldness. It's wisdom. It's what happens when you finally stop negotiating your value, when you stop begging to be heard, When you realize that love should never feel like survival. The Stoics taught that freedom doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from mastering your inner state. And sometimes, that inner mastery means walking away quietly, with no need for drama, explanation, or applause. It means saying, "I forgive you, but I no longer need you in my space." Because yes, forgiveness is powerful, but it doesn't require reconnection. You can forgive someone and still protect your peace. You can wish them well from a distance. You can honor the lesson without reopening the wound. And this is the part that might surprise you. Detachment is not the end of love. It's the beginning of self-respect. When you detach from someone who continually disrespects your time, your values, or your emotional safety, you're not giving up on connection. You're choosing a healthier one with yourself. Now, will guilt try to follow you? Yes, it always does at first, especially if you've been raised to prioritize others at the expense of your well-being. Especially if you've been taught that silence equals cruelty and boundaries equal betrayal. But here's what the Stoics would remind you. No man is free who is not master of himself. Epictetus. And how can you master yourself if every decision you make is based on how someone else will feel about it? Detachment is not selfish. It is self-honoring. And guilt? That's just the echo of outdated programming, trying to keep you stuck in a cycle you've outgrown. So if you're struggling right now, if you've distanced yourself from someone who hurt you, and the guilt is screaming louder than your peace, let me offer you this. You are allowed to leave relationships that cost you your mental clarity. You are allowed to outgrow dynamics that once felt like home. You are allowed to choose peace over loyalty to dysfunction. And no, you don't need to explain it to them. Not every exit requires a speech. Not every healing chapter needs closure from the one who caused the wound. Sometimes, the most powerful healing is found in the silence after the goodbye. So here's what I want you to remember. Detachment is not anger, it's maturity. Forgiveness is not weakness, it's release. Yes, choosing yourself is not selfish, it's sacred. And if guilt still lingers, ask yourself, who benefits from me staying small? Who wins when I betray myself to avoid making someone else uncomfortable? And what kind of life am I building? If guilt is the architect, the answers will guide you, not back into the past, but forward into freedom. Detachment doesn't mean your heart has hardened. It means your mind has sharpened. You've seen enough. You've felt enough. And now, you choose clarity over chaos, peace over guilt, and self-respect over tradition. You're not being cold. You're becoming clear. Part 8. Not everyone deserves a response. There comes a point in your life when you realize something simple but life-changing. Not everyone deserves a response. And I know that goes against everything we've been taught. We've been conditioned to explain ourselves, to respond to every text, to justify our silence, to offer closure to people who gave us none. Why? Because we think it's the right thing to do. But is it really? Let's pause and look deeper. When someone ghosts you, disappears without a word, then suddenly resurfaces with a casual, "Hey, how have you been?" Do you owe them a response? When someone manipulates you, blames you, disrespects you, then sends a guilt-ridden message like, "I guess you don't care anymore." Are you required to reply? When someone violates your peace, then demands your attention as if nothing happened, should you explain why you've stepped back? Here's the truth. Your silence isn't cruelty, it's clarity. Not every message deserves your energy. Not every person has earned access to your time. And not every situation needs to be fixed by your emotional labor. I want to be clear, This isn't about being petty. It's about being intentional. Because silence, when used consciously, is not passive. It's powerful. It's a boundary. It's a message. It's the decision to protect your peace rather than perform emotional CPR on people who wouldn't even stop to check your pulse. And let's talk about that urge, that reflex to respond. The moment someone disrespects you and then pretends like nothing happened, you feel it in your chest. You want to explain, to defend, to correct the narrative. That's not weakness. That's your emotional reflex trying to restore balance. But here's where Stoic wisdom steps in. Marcus Aurelius, the great Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who wronged you." So when they act with pettiness and you respond with stillness, you rise. When they try to bait you into an argument and you don't even flinch, you win. When they expect you to chase, explain, or justify, and you give them nothing but dignified silence, that's mastery. Because here's what emotional maturity understands. A response is an exchange of energy, and your energy is sacred. Don't waste it trying to teach someone a lesson they're committed to avoiding. Don't burn it trying to clarify something they've already twisted in their own mind. Don't spend it on people who only reach out when they feel your absence, but never valued your presence. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop explaining yourself to those who never truly listened in the first place. And yes, silence can feel uncomfortable at first. You'll be tempted to say something, anything, just to ease the tension. But that tension is not yours to soothe. Let it hang. Let them sit in their confusion. Let them feel the weight of your absence. Because silence speaks in ways words never could. It says, "I'm not here to play the same game twice. I've seen enough to know what I won't accept again. My peace no longer negotiates with dysfunction." And most importantly, it says, "I am no longer available for emotional bait." The Stoics teach us to master ourselves, not other people. And mastering yourself means knowing when to speak, and when silence is the stronger sentence. You don't owe people explanations for healing. You don't owe them access just because they finally noticed you're gone. And you don't owe a response to those who showed you, clearly, what version of you they were never ready for. So the next time your phone buzzes with a guilt text or a half-hearted message from someone who once treated you like an option, take a breath. And remember, not every knock at your door deserves to be answered. Let your silence be your standard. Let it be your boundary. Let it be your final word. Because silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's the loudest form of self-respect. You don't rise by reacting. You rise by responding only when it aligns with your peace, your values, and your worth. So ask yourself, does this message require my voice or my silence? And let the answer set you free. Part 9. You can't fix their mindset. There comes a moment in every journey of healing when you realize something heavy yet freeing. You can't fix their mindset, no matter how much you care. No matter how clearly you explain, no matter how much potential you see in them. Change is not something you can force into someone else. It has to be chosen. It has to be earned, and it has to come from within. And I know this is hard to accept. Especially if you're the kind of person who leads with empathy. You try to uplift. You try to show them a better way. You hope that if you just love them harder, explain it better, set the example, they'll finally get it. But here's what Stoic philosophy teaches us. Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. Epictetus. In other words, stop talking about the light. Start becoming it. Because the truth is, when someone isn't ready to grow, your explanations will feel like pressure. Your insight will feel like criticism. Your clarity will make them uncomfortable. And instead of moving forward, they'll push back. They'll resist. They'll shrink deeper into their patterns, and maybe even blame you for trying to help. That's when you find yourself stuck in a cycle of overfunctioning. You carry their weight. You chase their awareness. You exhaust yourself trying to build a bridge they refuse to cross. But here's the question: at what cost? Because every time you try to fix someone else's mindset, you abandon your own. You start dimming your light so they can feel comfortable in the dark. You start minimizing your standards so they don't feel inadequate. You start explaining yourself over and over, thinking if you just find the right words, they'll finally change. But real change doesn't come from the outside. It's not born out of your explanations, your effort, or your love. It's a decision, one that only they can make. So instead of trying to change them, upgrade you. Upgrade your presence. Upgrade your emotional boundaries. Upgrade the version of yourself that no longer overextends to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. This is the shift from explaining to embodying. When someone disrespects your values, you don't lecture them. You live those values even louder. When someone mocks your growth, you don't defend it. You keep growing, so far and so fast that their doubt can't reach you. Because people don't change from pressure. They change from inspiration. And inspiration doesn't beg. It doesn't plead. It doesn't over-explain. It simply radiates. And if they're ready to rise with you, beautiful. If not, that's okay too. Not everyone is meant to walk the whole road with you. The Stoics would remind you, your peace is your responsibility. Their mindset is not. And I want you to hear this loud and clear. It's not your job to save someone from themselves. It's not your job to drag someone toward clarity while they cling to chaos. It's not your job to prove your worth to someone who's blind to it. It's your job to live in alignment with who you are becoming. So the next time you feel the urge to convince someone to grow, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, is this conversation expanding me or draining me? Am I leading or pleading? Am I teaching from example or trying to control their path? Because that difference matters. When you stop trying to change their mindset and start refining your own, you move into real power. You begin to walk your talk. You stop just knowing your worth. You embody it. And without even trying, you send the clearest message. This is who I am. This is where I'm headed, and I will not shrink to make you comfortable. That's not ego. That's evolution. You don't need to fix anyone's mindset. You just need to walk in your own truth. Because the most powerful form of leadership isn't explanation, it's embodiment. Let your life speak for you. Let your boundaries speak for you. Let your peace speak louder than any argument ever could. And if they're meant to meet you on that level, they will. Part 10. Calm is power. Peace is control. Let me tell you something many people will never understand until they've been through the fire and made it out the other side. Calm is power. Peace is control. Not the kind of control that manipulates others. Not the kind of power that dominates rooms, but the kind that comes from mastering yourself, from knowing that no matter what chaos is thrown your way, you don't flinch. You breathe, you observe, you respond if necessary. But most of the time, you simply remain unmoved. And that is where true strength lives. You see, a lot of people mistake calm for indifference. They think your stillness means you don't care, that your silence means you have nothing to say, that your peace means you've given up. But here's what they don't realize. This kind of calm is earned. It's not passive, it's practiced. It's the result of every storm you've walked through, every betrayal you've healed from, every moment you wanted to explode, but chose dignity instead. This calm is your discipline. It's the muscle you've built after years of emotional chaos. It's what you developed the day you stopped giving people free rent in your mind. And peace. Peace is not weakness. Peace is power under control. It's knowing exactly what you could say, but choosing not to. It's recognizing your capacity to burn someone with truth and still walking away quietly. Why? Because you no longer need to prove your strength. You're living it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." And that's what you've done. They expected you to react, to lash out, to break, to spiral. But you didn't. You chose stillness. You chose clarity. You chose the quiet victory that comes from knowing you're no longer available for emotional drama. That is your final move. That is the moment you become untouchable, because the person who cannot be provoked, the person who no longer responds to bait, the person who can sit in silence, unmoved by manipulation or guilt, that person is free. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to correct every lie. You don't need to explain your boundaries, your distance, or your glow-up. Your peace speaks louder than words ever could. And let's be honest, that peace unsettles people who used to feed off your chaos. When you were reactive, they knew how to handle you. When you were angry, they knew what buttons to push. But now you've taken that control back. You've stopped dancing in their storm. You've started building your own sky. And the best part? You didn't have to announce it. You didn't have to post about it. You didn't have to tell them, "You'll see one day." No. You simply became the calm. And when you become the calm, you become the one thing they can't touch, the one thing they can't shake, the one presence they remember long after you've left the room. So if you've been told lately, you've changed, you're so distant, you don't care anymore, let them talk, because what they're really saying is, you're no longer giving me the reaction I depended on. You're no longer easy to manipulate. You've elevated, and I can't reach you anymore. And they're right, because this version of you, this version no longer entertains what disturbs the soul. This version lives in stillness, not because life is quiet, but because you are. This version doesn't chase chaos, it creates space. This version is the embodiment of what Stoicism calls virtue in action. So if you're listening to this right now, let it land deep. You don't need to match anyone's energy. You don't need to defend your growth. You don't need to fight to be heard by people committed to misunderstanding you. You've stopped reacting. You've started observing. And you've risen. And that is the most powerful transformation of all. They wanted chaos. You gave them calm. They wanted a reaction. You gave them silence. They wanted control. You chose peace. You didn't lose the battle. You ended the war. And in doing so, you became something no one expected, untouchable. So here you are. You've walked through betrayal, confusion, silence. You've been misunderstood, blamed, gaslit, dismissed. You've faced the kind of pain that doesn't scream out loud, but quietly reshapes who you are. And now, you're not seeking revenge. You're not waiting for an apology. You're not trying to prove your worth. You've evolved. That's the quiet revolution they didn't expect. Because the truth is, you didn't win by fighting back. You didn't win by outsmarting, exposing, or punishing them. You won by walking away, with your soul intact. You reclaimed your power the Stoic way, through clarity, through stillness, through refusing to give anyone access to your peace who hasn't earned the right to be there. You didn't get closure from them. You gave closure to yourself. Because what you've realized is that healing doesn't always come with a bow on top. Sometimes it comes in the form of silence, a decision, a deep breath, a door that quietly closes, never to reopen again. And that's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's you no longer reacting out of fear, but responding from strength, no longer chasing justice in their hands, because you've already found peace in your own. Remember what Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." And you're not. You didn't become cold, you became clear. You didn't mirror their chaos. You created space for calm. You didn't need to tear them down to feel tall, because growth already elevated you beyond the need for that game. And make no mistake, they may never admit what they did. They may never see the pain they caused. They may live inside their own illusions forever. But you don't have to. You've stepped out of that loop. You've stopped rewriting the past. And now, you're writing something entirely new. A life that doesn't rely on their apology to begin. Because peace isn't something you find in them. It's something you choose within you. And you've chosen it. Your silence now. It isn't avoidance. It isn't guilt. It's not fear of confrontation. It's self-respect. It's the strength to know, I could engage, but I won't. I could prove my point, but I don't need to. I could reopen this wound, but I've already healed it. And in that stillness, you've become untouchable. Not because nothing can hurt you, but because nothing can own you anymore. You no longer need validation. You no longer need closure. You no longer need their understanding to move forward. That is the Stoic path. You don't just talk about peace, you embody it. You don't just read about resilience, you become it. You don't chase apologies to feel free. You realize you already are. So let your stillness speak louder than their denial. Let your integrity echo louder than any accusation. Let your life be the proof. That growth isn't loud, it's focused, it's clear, and it's powerful. Because when they look back, if they ever do, they'll realize they couldn't control you, not because you fought back harder, but because you no longer needed the fight. You rose above the need for revenge. You stepped off the battlefield, and you built a new world inside yourself. That's the Stoic way. So wherever you are in your journey, whether you're still finding your footing, or you're already walking in your power, remember this, you don't need their apology. You don't need closure from the past. You don't need chaos to confirm your clarity. You've already outgrown the game. Now it's time to live like it. If this message spoke to something inside you, if you felt seen, understood, or just a little more grounded than before, then this is your invitation. Subscribe to join a space built not on noise, but on wisdom. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your journey matters, and your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Like this video if it helped you reclaim even a piece of your peace. And if you know someone who's struggling to let go, to detach, to rise in silence, send this to them. Be the spark, because healing is personal, but we don't have to walk through it alone. This isn't just a video. It's a movement toward clarity, strength, and inner sovereignty. Welcome to the Stoic path forward.